Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Researcher's Toolkit, a new series from anotherdegree.com. In this series, we talk with real academic researchers and have them show us the tools, workflows, and resources they actually use day to day. So we want to demystify research and pull back the curtain on research and show you what it really looks like, which I can tell you from my own experience is not necessarily the tidy and nicely linear version you often see in textbooks, and not just the polished final product. But by joining us, I hope you'll pick up some practical tips and tools that can make your own research process very smooth, more efficient, and a lot less intimidating. So my name is Dr. Kelly Kistner. I'm a social scientist and the founder and director of anotherdegree.com. There, individuals and institutions can learn more about how we support students through every stage of their postgraduate degree journeys and beyond. And throughout this series, you'll see me and my amazing librarian extraordinaire co-host, Renee, along with several special guests and mentors from Another Degree. They're going to demonstrate practical tools that students and researchers at all stages can start using right away. I'm so thrilled for you all to join us, and I'm very pleased now to introduce Renee and today's guest researcher.
Hello, everyone. My name is Renee Bowen, and I'm a librarian and mentor with Another Degree. I'm really excited to be here to talk with you all today. Please help me welcome Dr. Andrea Briceno, an economist and mentor with Another Degree. Dr. Andrea has her master's in public policy and government and her PhD in public administration and public affairs. Dr. Andrea, thank you for being here with us today. Can you briefly share with us some more information about your background and research area?
Well, thank you, Kelly and Renee, for having me here for this invitation. Yes, well, my background is in economics. I am a policy scholar, which focuses on different topics. I study the interaction between citizens and the state. I work on international development projects. I have had experience in the US and internationally. And in my daily work, I combine both economic and policy analysis, and I use different data sets. No public data sets, and sometimes depending on my work, on my research question, and the kind of goals in the project, I build my own data sets. No, based on surveys or interviews that I conduct with individuals or organizations, but sometimes I rely on public available data sets.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Andrea. And for everyone watching, I want to highlight that Andrea, Renee, myself, and over 30 mentors across a wide range of advanced degrees, so PhDs, EdDs, MDs, MBAs, JDs, and on. We are also covering all various fields and careers and are available through Another Degree for one-on-one mentorship and consulting. You can book sessions for graduate admissions guidance, application review, scholarship searches, research and dissertation coaching, career advising for scholars, and editing or support with academic publishing. We also have mentors offering small group cohorts that would run, say, about 6 to 8 weeks. So, for example, Dr. Andrea here will be leading a cohort for graduate students who are designing or conducting quantitative research projects. You'll find more details about that in the description below. And you can also catch Dr. Andrea elsewhere on our YouTube channel, including her primer on using RStudio, which is a really great free software used for quantitative analysis, and her appearance in our panel with UCLA, along with several other Another Degree mentors, on exploring and preparing for careers in research. So consider that a word from our sponsors. That's us. We are the sponsors. Potentially open to some other sponsors. Please reach out. And to set the stage for today's topic. So I know that a lot of students assume that doing research means you have to collect your own data. And sometimes that's true. Sometimes that's necessary. Sometimes that's advantageous, depending on the topic that you're studying or the population that you're studying. But there's also a huge ecosystem of existing data sets, quantitative and qualitative, including archives, surveys, and collections that researchers use all the time. And not only can you use them to build original analyses for your research, but you can also use them if you're learning quantitative methods. They're incredibly useful for practicing with raw data, running statistics, and testing theories. Now, some of the most powerful and largest data sets that have been going on for, in many cases, decades, if not centuries, maybe not full centuries, come from government agencies. Things like Bureau of Labor Statistics, the US Census, the Centers for Disease Control, polling organizations like Pew and Gallup, international bodies like the World Bank and IMF. There are also large social science surveys like the General Social Survey. And also, many peer-reviewed journals require data sets to be put into a repository for replication, for use by other scholars, and to contribute to open science. So let me just kind of quickly show you a few examples, and I'll put some of the links to these in the chat so you can see them. But a good first place to start if you're interested in government data is data.gov. This includes data sets from many, many government and municipal organizations. So for instance, AmeriCorps, Fed Reserve System, also city level data. You have Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, Data Department of Agriculture, so major federal agencies, Department of Commerce, Education, and Energy there. And you can see, look how many data sets some of these have. Of course, in the US, you're familiar with the census every 10 years. So you can get the actual census data downloads here, but you can also access some of their other surveys that they offer. We'll see another way to access the ACS later. They also provide some tools so you can visualize the data. I mentioned international sources, so that includes World Bank. So various sources that you can find here. And also, again, ways to play around with the data directly from their websites. And I mentioned repositories where scientists, academic researchers can deposit their data, whether they've used it already for a peer-reviewed study or it's work that there is underway. So you can see some various sources here. This is through the University of Michigan's ICPSR. And Figshare is another site where scientific data can be shared and used. Now, why does working with pre-existing data matter? So knowing what existing data is out there is really important as a researcher because using pre-existing data, for one, it can dramatically speed up the time it takes to complete a project. So you don't need to go through IRB review for human subjects data. You don't need to go through a huge recruitment process. You already know you're working with high quality, standardized, reliability tested variables. And it also puts you in direct conversation with researchers who are using the same data sets. And even when there are good reasons to collect your own data, you can use existing data sets, for instance, as a kind of pilot test to explore hypotheses before investing time in collecting original data. Plus, knowing the questions that are used, for instance, in survey data or the variables used in different data sets, it gives you a baseline and comparison. And that's ready to use validated questions that you can use with your own sample. And it can also be really useful if you're studying a different or more specific subpopulation or examining change over time. So I've already mentioned a few places where you can source pre-existing data, and I'll include some relevant links in the description, but it's also important to know that there's an entire ecosystem out there to support you, help researchers navigate existing data sets that are available. That includes librarians. Some have specific titles as data librarians and statistical consulting centers. A lot of things too, as researchers, you might learn on your own. You can look at the guides on various websites and see what kind of data is available and what can be used, but all play a role in guiding you towards the right resources. And of course, if you don't have access to that kind of support, or if you want more personalized one-on-one guidance, another degree mentors can help. So Dr. Andrea, is there anything you'd like to add about using pre-existing public data sets as a tool?
Well, I would say that really the source of the data and the kind of data that you need to use depends on the research question or the kind of problem that you want to investigate. So really, you can find, like Kelly said, multiple sources of data. And I think that particularly in the US and in some international organizations had a very robust and I will say comprehensive data. I think that the key element is to think about it, what kind of data is more appropriate to use to respond a research question or to research about a phenomenon or a research problem. No, and I will say that there is a lot of rich public data available. Sometimes we are not aware of this, and I think that in your daily work on the way, you learn where you can like get the data that you needed. I could just like add an advice that try to use accurate, reliable data from official sites and from kind of official or formal organizations, that you can rely on, because also you can find a lot of websites or organizations that build their own data, but sometimes it is not reliable, it's not accurate. So I will say just be careful that the data that you are using is kind of public, comes from an official site or organization, has the kind of rigorosity, and kind of methodology that you expect when you are doing research. And also sometimes there are also public resources of qualitative data. I mean, when people think about data, usually they just focus on quantitative data, which is great. But I also suggest that the qualitative data also gives you a lot of insights and explains you like a lot of the context that you are investigating. So, and if you don't have the data, you always have like this room and ability to conduct or to develop your own data, or even to build on the existing variables and to create like a new variable. I mean, again, it depends on your research question, what is your research goals, what kind of audience you are interested in pursuing. No, but I mean, I will say that there is a lot of resources that you can use it. No, I think that the key element is how to use it and how to analyze this data.
I had a follow-up question to that.
Mhm.
I was wondering if you've ever had a research question that you could not find data for, and if that happens, how do you move forward with your research?
Well, I think that is a great question. Yes, I think that it has happened many times. For instance, I remember for my PhD dissertation, I was exploring, I mean, for my research, I explored the kind of barriers that undocumented immigrants face when they access higher education in those states where they can benefit from in-state resident tuition policy. And of course, first, you don't have like data from undocumented immigrants in the US, but also thinking about the barriers that they face is something that really you can't just like build. So based on that, actually, this data doesn't exist. What I did was that I examined around 270 application process across the US. No, I went like to the application process, what kind of information they request for, what kind of documentation undocumented immigrants needed to provide to get accepted. And from that, I built my own index actually of barriers and try like to quantify the learning compliance and psychological costs. So it is a great example. I didn't have the data. Also, I didn't have because I wanted to compare or to kind to associate these barriers with the enrollment rates for this population. But of course, there is no public data about undocumented immigrants accessing higher education. So in that moment, I used like a couple of proxies that I built based on ethnicity, for instance, Hispanic origin, based on previous studies that shows that most of the undocumented students come from Hispanic, no Latin American countries. But it's a great question. Sometimes you don't have the data and you need to figure out how to build this data, but no try like to figure out what is like the best approach to create this data.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great example and really, speaks to how, sometimes we don't have questions that are being asked and populations being addressed because the data isn't available. So
Mm.
yeah, that's fantastic that you did that. But well, next I'd really like to see, what kind of data you have used, if you'd like to give us a demonstration of, some of the data sets that you used in your work.
Yes, of course. Kelly, well, I have used different data. Again, it depends on the project I am working on. It depends on the research question, what kind of papers I have it. But let me, I use all of the integrated. Let me, if you can see, can you see my screen? I I love the IPUMS website. The IPUMS is the integrated public use microdata survey. The IPUMS is no, I mean, the IPUMS is a kind of website that combines or harmonizes data from different data sources, like let's say, the Census Bureau is Bureau Census, the American Community Survey, etc. I like a lot, and I think that many scholars and practitioners use the IPONS because it's very reliable. It is like an official data source. And again, it combines different type of surveys that the American, at the federal and state level, like produce and publish. So let's say that you go to the IPONS data. Well, I would like to tell you, I mean, you go like in the beginning, you need to register. It's very easy. It is like a free open source. You just like register right now. I am already registered, so I already log in. But if you don't have like an account, just to create your account. It is going to ask you for basic information about your country, your state, your occupation. I mean, some kind of demographic data, but it's free, so don't worry about it. Let's say that I don't know what topic you want like to explore. Let's say that you want to explore the relationship between educational attainment and income. So you go here after you have like registered and enroll in your account, because if you don't do it, you cannot get the data. And let's say that you go for select data, and let's say that you want to explore different variables that gives you an idea if there is any relationship between educational attainment and income, right? You will expect that a higher educational attainment is going like to give you like a higher salary, or income. So let's say that you go to search. Let's say that you type the variable that you are interested. Well, something important is IPUMS data, the Integrated Public Use Microdata Survey, reports the data at the individual and household level. So it's a very good source of information. You can also get aggregated data, but it is what I say that many scholars, researchers, and practitioners use this website or this kind of data source because it is really great. So let's say that I look for education. And if you see, I have different, even in that variables, I have a lot of subcategories, right? And you can see here all, usually when you want to explore educational attainment, use the variable education, that it is like EDUC. You could no, you just like select that, but if you want like to explore the school attendance, the type of school, if it is private, public, charitable, etc. No, and let's say that I select education, and after you select, you always put, it's great, it gives you a kind of description of your the variable, right? So for instance, it says education indicates respondents' educational attainment as measured by the highest year of a school or degree completed. That, let's say that in my research question I am interested in that. So always like look for the kind of description, because maybe you are selecting a variable that really doesn't respond to your research question. You go to, let's say that you look for other variable, let's say that you look for income. And again, there are a lot of subcategories, right, of income. Usually in this kind of a study, because I am doing the study at the individual level, you select this, that is NCTOT, that is your total personal income. But again, no, be careful in looking at the description. Know what is this variable about it, if you are really measuring what you want to measure. And you go again to the variables, and let's say that you want to explore age, right? And you select, for instance, age. No, and well, I forgot to tell that each variable that you select, you just put add to cart. No, and again, you go to that, and there are like plenty of variables that you can like look. No, you could like put like let's say employment. No, I mean any variable that you want like to explore, and you can like here to look for instance, if you want to analyze the type of occupation, let's say, and the educational attainment and the income. So let's say that I select this, and again add to cart. And if you see here on my right, in the data card, you can see the variables that you are like selecting, right? Now, if you see, I haven't selected a sample. What is the sample? Well, I am looking what type of year, what kind of unit of analysis. It is at the individual level, household level, state level. So I go to select samples, because right now I have selected the variables age, education, income. And here, again, IPUMS builds all their data combining different surveys. In this case, we are going to use the American Community Survey. The Census Bureau is the official organization, right, institution that publishes this survey. And you know that this survey takes place annually, no, every year. So in this case, let's say, I mean, you can like select the years that you want, right? Let's say that I want to select, let's say that I want to compare 2024 and 2023, right? Or the years that you wanted. Of course, the more years, your data set is going like to be very large, because usually I don't have the right, I mean, the accurate data right now, but I think that annually they survey like 3,500,000 individuals. So it is a lot of data. And I just don't select this. Let's say that I just want like the 2000, because if you see, for instance, this data in the variable that I selected, you can actually get no like historical records, which is great. But let's say that I just submit 2024, 2023 for each year, right? And you just click submit samples. And here you can see the variables that I am going to analyze, the kind of samples, the variables that I am interested, and that's it. And you just put create the data strat. And again, if you don't have like an account, you need to register and to have your account to get the data, but it is free. So you click create data strat. It is up to you if you want like to describe your strat. Remember that it is tied to your account. So maybe for your records or your own kind of, let's say that after 5 years you review what you did today. So you have like in mind, oh, this data was for to work on a project. I don't know, analyzing the relationship between educational attainment and income. Okay, it is just, I will say that it's just for your records, no? Especially when you are doing or working on several projects, no? You use different data sources and you just click submit the strat. Today, because of the time, well, it is like the email that is tied to my account, and it tells you sometimes with the data is really large, no, and it's very, I will say heavy. I don't know if it is the right word. Of course, it is going like to take a lot of time, but you will get a notification where your data is ready. And you have different formats to get your data. No, if you are familiar with SPSS, SAS, STAT, and R. Usually the formats that I use is STAT and R. But anyway, I mean, if you are comfortable and familiar with the other data set, you can do it. And you just click no, download the data in the format that you wanted. And again, I mean, today we don't have like the time to do it. But no, it is, I mean, it can take maybe about, I will say, sometimes 20 minutes, 15 minutes, 10 minutes. I mean, it depends on how much variables. Of course, if you select many years and many variables, it is going to take a lot of time. But you will always be notified in your email, no? So I will say that this data set, I really recommend. This data set combines, again, different US surveys from different sources, the Bureau, the Census Bureau, the labor statistics, the higher education, and you can have all the variables that you can imagine, sociodemographic variables, status variables, no, I mean, a lot of kind of categories, and I will say that is very accurate. So it is one of the data that you can use. The other data that Kelly mentioned a lot, if you are interested, for instance, in political analysis, is the American National Election Studies. This survey, I will say this is great. I have used this survey a lot in my graduate classes where I teach research methods. And you can do a lot of analysis how American people think about different US institutions, think about Congress, think about the Supreme Court, think about how the government is dealing with different issues, with immigration, with labor market, with industry, with climate change, etc. So it's very good. I mean, it usually reports the kind of support or the public opinion in different topics. I use a lot. Again, you need to create an account. It's free. And I would just like to show you, I already have, for instance, this data set. Can you see my data set in Stata?
Oh, not
Is
yet.
At the moment, yeah.
No? Okay. Let me I look because I need I open share settings. Let me one
You might
sec.
have to stop share and move it over, maybe.
Yes, I think that is here. Can you see my data?
Oh,
Yes,
yeah.
it just popped
Yes.
up.
Okay. So this data, I mean, after you go to the American National Election Studies, right? And you create the account, it's very easy. And you get the data. Usually, this data is before the election, after the election. You can imagine you can get multiple information about different topics. So for instance, this data is from 2020. Of course, the individual identification is just coded with a code. Of course, we need to protect individual information, but it gives you a lot of information about how a person think about different topics. For instance, let's say you see here on my right, you can explore immigration. So for instance, I know the survey asks how people think or feel about immigration and custom enforcement agency. No, it would be very interesting, for instance, to compare how people perceive the agency now in comparison, I don't know, related to 4 years ago, 3 years ago, no, based, of course, of all the political environment. You could also see how people think before the election and after the election, if they approve or disapprove the president managing the immigration policy. No, it is just an example. You can look for abortion, right? So you can ask how people think about if the Supreme Court, for instance, is managing the abortion rights properly. Of course, it is public opinion, no? But I think that it gives you, and it is across the US per state, so it's great, for instance, to compare political standings and perspective across the US. You can ask for employment, right? And it is going to say, for instance, there is a question on employment, how much better or worse in last year regarding this year. You can explore different, right? Even, for instance, marriage in gays, know how people think about the gay marriage. I mean, there is a lot of political, social issues that you can explore with American national studies. I'm sorry, election survey studies, and you could develop different analyses. In some, because most of my students when I was teaching at Virginia Tech come from political science field. No, really, this survey was really interesting for them to explore the political dynamic in the US, how it changes over time, etc. So I will say that is great for that. You could, well, it is not the space for 2 days, but with this with data, you could conduct basic descriptive statistics to know about like percentages, average, know how the median behaves, but you can also run very sophisticated regression analysis. For instance, to see how different perspectives of opinions regarding public institutions in the US, social institutions are related with the support for a particular candidate, right? And it will be great. So it is other kind of survey. You could also, let's say that, let's say that you also want to explore, let me show you. You can see here, right, my screen. Let's say that you are more interested also in economic data. So you could like explore the Federal Reserve, which is a great source of information and it's also free. So here, well, along with the fact that you can get like reports, a document and policy briefs about different economic issues like inflation, unemployment, employment, the labor market, well, etc., international trade, tariffs, etc. You can like get the data here. You just go like to data and you can like get the data that you wanted. There is like great data related to different sectors, agriculture, industry, manufacturing, again, international trading, nearshoring, etc. And the data usually here is the same, it's in the Excel, Stata, R format, and maybe in future episodes here in another degree, we could like explore, I would say data based on a particular sector. So you could like see that if you are interested in interest rates over time. No, you can like get this kind of data. You could also like select, for instance, this is like the interest rate in the US from July 2026 until now, in the different days of the month, etc. I mean, there is a lot. You can like get data for unemployment, for inflation, for how the markets, the financial markets are behaving. No, you know that the Federal Reserve is also a great data. And again, it depends on your interest. Lately, I had found this. I don't know if you can see my screen, the US Bureau of Labor Statistics. If you want like more precise data about, let's say, the informality in the economy. If you want like to see the type of job openings that are more, I will say that are more like stronger like in the labor market right now. What kind of the supply or demand of jobs are no are like, I mean, what is like the behavior in the economy. I mean, there are a lot of information, and something important is that usually, for instance, if you compare the US Bureau of Labor Statistics with the Federal Reserve, no, in terms of unemployment, etc., you will see that the data is the same or is very similar or accurate. And I wanted to do that clarification. Sometimes the data could differ a little bit, but it depends on the methodology, no, that each agency is using, no. But usually, I mean, you can like use different sources of data and you are going like to get the same findings because the data is like the same, no? It is not going to happen that the unemployment rates in the US Bureau of Labor Statistics really differ substantially from the Federal Reserve. No, it is my point. It could like differ a little bit, but it depends on the methodology that each agency is using. And well, there is a lot. The Department of Education has like a great data related at the different levels from kindergarten, high school, higher education related to enrollment, type of school, ethnicity, race, etc. No, there is a lot of great data. like in one, I mean, before the recording, I was talking to Kelly and Renee about my last publication that I use. Let me look here. I was interested in exploring how American people use their time when they look for government services, when they wait for government services. I wanted to explore if there are differences across races and ethnicities. And I was just curious. I mean, how much time people spend, when you go to the DMV, to get your driver license or your car registration, or when you go to the Department of Social Services to get a service for, I don't know, food stamp, SNAP, Medicaid. No, how long does it take? So I found a very interesting survey that is the American Time Use Survey. Um, that again, the same US labor statistics publishes, and it's great. I was talking to them about how here in these data you can get data about how American people use their time in different activities. In education, working, shopping, traveling, etc. So again, you can like explore the tables. You can like filter per activity. For instance, here, table one, time is spent in primary activities and percent of the civilian population engaging in each activity. So again, it's a very large data set, but if you're interested in a particular topic, or if you wanted to produce research, or a policy brief, I think that it is great. Again, in my case, I wanted to explore because one of my research avenues is exploring the interaction between citizens and the state, and how to make more efficient, right, the delivery of government services, public services. So I was interested in exploring there are like differences, because not everyone like faces the same application process, right? Or everyone have like to do has like to go to the DMV office or to ask for, I mean, if it is the case, to request Medicaid, etc. So, no, why, of course, and it is just your interpretation of the data, why some population groups spend more time when they look for government services, why no, the waiting time is longer. So I will say that this survey, like getting back a little bit to the Rini question, sometimes actually you are not aware of some data that they already that it already exists, and just like doing research and maybe searching in Google search, asking experts in the field, professors, you realize, oh my God, no, it is like data that we have it and maybe we don't explore. And again, I will say that the US has a very sound and comprehensive data in different topics. And so, yes, I will say that just ask and know about the data that you needed, and it will be great.
I was wanting to ask about bias. You've mentioned like methodology a few times. So I'll ask it this one way, and then I might add on to it. So the first part, the first wording would be, are there any things researchers should keep in mind about how data is collected that might affect how reliable or valid it is?
Yes, I mean, of course. I mean, I think that it depends the time that you collect the data, the location, again, the kind of methodology that I explained. For instance, let's say that you want to explore employment and unemployment rates, and you can like get different findings if, for instance, conceptually, let's say that in some studies you consider that being an employee is these people who have been like looking for a job for 3 months. Let's say that in one's source of data it is considered unemployed. No, I mean a person who has been unemployed. But let's say that in other methodologies, people who had been without any kind of employment or during 6 months. So of course the findings are going like to differ. And I wouldn't say that one is better than other. I will say that you have to be transparent in your research, in your research design when you are writing the data source, how the methodology was like conducted, not to be just transparent about that, not to be clear in this methodology. They consider being an employee for more than 3 months, in the other for more than 6 months, or in this methodology, for instance, in my country is kind of very crazy because informality, people who work informally, they are considered that they are informal even if they just work 5 hours per week. Now, to me, it will be kind of being like an employee, no? And they are considered that these people are working, they are employed, even if they just work 5 hours per week. No, so it depends on the methodology that you use. The same with inflation, right? Are you considering I will say the behavior of the prices in all the goods and services, or are you just focused on the goods for, let's say, the basic consumption of a household? No, because if you are like considering also the prices of cars or clothes, maybe it is not like the basic no goods or services that a household needs to survive, right? So I will say that just be careful about the methodology that they use, how they are like measuring that. One thing is to talk about absolute values, other thing is about relative values. No, what is this percentage regarding the total sample or the total population? Other thing is about the absolute values. So just like no, I will say look at the methodology very closely. No, be transparent about how you report your findings and you do like the interpretation. No, one thing is to interpret percentages, ratios, absolute values.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. And it does lead into the second half of my question, which I'm also still trying to work on the wording, but it was thinking along the lines of, when we talk about resources, we'll often talk about like, oh, there might be bias that you should look out for. So is bias something to still look out for in a data set? And if so, how or where would you be able to discover whether or not something was biased?
Well, I think that is a great question. I think, Renee, that to be honest, I think that everyone we had bias
Mhm.
when we are doing research. I don't think that we are totally neutral, right? I think that I think that I mean, when you start like doing any research, you already have like some kind of assumptions, right? Or some kind of paradigms, no, that you have it. And of course, I will say that no, the key and the goal is to be the more objective. No, I had found like studies where I say, well, I was wrong about this data. And maybe no, it is not accurate. Maybe I want like to prove that if you impose an example, if you impose like a tariff to an international good or services, of course, the prices, right? The economic theory tells you that the prices domestically, nationally are going like to increase with a tariff, right? Of course, you want to protect your economy, but in the end, what you are, I mean, the outcome will be like an increase in prices. But sometimes it doesn't happen because I don't know, let's say that the central bank could like at the same time increase interest rates. So maybe you don't have this inflation outcome that you expect, etc. So, well, you are right. I think that everyone like has bias. It has to be a lot with the methodology, with interpretation. Also, maybe for some people, I don't know, an unemployment rate of 10% is acceptable. For other people, it's terrible. No, for other people, unacceptable. Like unemployment rate is 5%. So it depends, right? You can say, oh, 10% of unemployment is terrible for the economy. No, we are like in the worst moment time in the in the history. No, and it depends. Of course, the researchers, I would say that the social media, even the media, no, try like to present the findings how you consider how good or how bad, right, a situation is. And I will say that everyone has like a political standing. I will say that just try like to be neutral, to compare maybe the behavior of that variable over time, try like to offer explanations. And of course, no, you assume that, for instance, a government or any kind of organization, NGO also want like to improve, right, the services. So no, the kind of I will say governance, right, that you do in your everyday. So, but yes, the bias exists. I will say that is part of the research process. I will say that I will say that is something kind of ethical, no? Like for a scholar and academy to be the more neutral and unbiased, no? And try like to say, well, it is what the findings are telling, it is the methodology that I am saying, and I propose that or I recommend that. And it is why it is so important that, for instance, when you are doing research or you publish, you provide also the data source that you use because other scholars could replicate, right, your study. And maybe they use another methodology and maybe they use, I don't know, they found like another finding, right? I don't know if you remember this case. Well, I don't know like the right year, but it was like a case many years ago about like a vaccine that was producing autism in children, right? And you just remember that case. The methodology used was not accurate, was not wrong, right? And from that finding, right, many families and people, the problem is the impact that you produce with your research, right? Many people like and families were, well, I don't know how I like to put the vaccines to my kids. And of course, the outcome is that you will create really a public health problem, right, in society. So, and after that, other medical doctors and researchers, right, found that it was wrong, that the methodology was not accurate, that you cannot like get from one case in a million, right, to make like a kind of generalization that a vaccine produces autism, that you could like need to consider other factors, socio-demographic, etc. So yes, but the bias exists. I'm sure that maybe that study wanted like to avoid that people get no vaccinated like their kids. And if you remember, I don't remember the exact year. I don't know if it was like in the 90s. But I am saying that because I had two kids and I remember that when they were like 2 3 years. No, there were still people in the US telling me, no, don't put the vaccine because the vaccine produces autism from a study that it was not accurate.
Yeah. Thank you for that really nuanced response. I feel like when people hear bias, it can often become very polarizing and charged, but you point out exactly the truth that everyone is coming with their own perspective and their own research question and their own way of thinking what is the best way to answer this question. So to recognize that everything might have bias within it is not necessarily to say that it is accurate, inaccurate, correct, right, wrong. It's just to be aware of the fact that everyone's approaching a question from a certain perspective, and that can lead to bias even in something like data and data collection.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I think that this is accurate to say. I think that everyone has bias. I mean, to say that no, there's like a scholar or like a policymaker that is totally neutral is no. Of course, I feel that the more you study, the more you work with data, the more you explore a topic, I will say that you are becoming like to be more kind of open mind, know about how you perceive a phenomenon, no, and you consider different like factors in the picture, right? But yes, it's like, of course, it depends on the media outlet that you listen to. No, you will have in research is the same, more progressive kind of media, more regressive, more conservative, more liberal. No.
I was wondering, Dr. Andrea, if you can tell us how you learned to work with data sets. Is it something that you were taught during your program or something that you learned along the way?
No, I will say that nobody like taught me know how like to get data set or analyze. Maybe sometimes in some classes, no, they can mention some kind of data set, but I think that they doing, no, like learning by doing is something up to you. I will say that when you have like a research project in mind, a research question, you want to investigate about a problem, at least in my case, it has been along the way. No, and I want like to respond these questions. So I do some kind of exploration if this data already exists, and when you just do some kind of keywords in Google or in any kind of searching, you will realize, oh, I can like get this data from this source, from this agency. No, this federal agency produces that, this state. No, I will say that it has been along the way. I also like get research papers, right, related to the topic that you're interested, so I can see the sources of data and information that the authors are using. So I go there. No, but I will say that it's kind of learning by doing, exploring the data, and you learn a lot, from mistakes. Sometimes you get like the wrong data, but I think that is the learning. For instance, with IPUMS, in the beginning, I got like the data that I was not looking for, so you need like to repeat the process many times until you get the data. And I will say that just ask. No, I am not really afraid of ask. No, if I don't know something. Usually, for instance, I post on these community surveys, or the current population survey, etc. Sometimes they have like a kind of contact information, like with the librarians, and you can like ask, no, I am looking for this data, it is accurate, and I think that they are great resources to respond you how to get the data. But no, I will say that you don't learn that in really like in a class. I think that you get that like doing, by yourself, the research and exploring the topic.
Yeah, thank you for your response. It's really inspiring to see that you now work with data professionally and what you've been able to self-teach yourself along the way. All right, well, thank you, Dr. Andrea. It has been a pleasure having you here today to kick off the Researchers Toolkit series. Your passion and knowledge have been a true treat to hear about, and I look forward to hearing more about your work in future episodes. So for everyone watching, the Researchers Toolkit series is just kicking off, and we have a lot of good stuff in store. Keep an eye out for future episodes where we will continue to feature real researchers using real tools. Visit the Another Degree website for more information about how we can help you on your educational journey, and also to learn more about how you can meet with me, Dr. Kelly, Dr. Andrea, or one of the other amazing available mentors. Until next time, we'll see you later.
Bye. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Renee. Thank you, Kelly, for having me.